And for a closer look at the release of prisoners in Myanmar, we have in studio Dr. Maitri Angtwin from the National University of Singapore and Dr. Alistair Cook from the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me this evening. So this appears to be one of the largest release of prisoners. How significant is this move from the government? Dr. Maitri, why don't I start with you?
Yes, I think it's significant in two ways. First, it demonstrates to the international community that the Myanmar government is serious about pursuing the types of political reforms that it has been pursuing in the last 20 years. At the same time, it's also important to demonstrate to the domestic constituency that there will be more voices in this process towards rebuilding the country and rebuilding its socio-economic infrastructure.
Okay, and well, some prominent people, especially dissidents and political prisoners, they've been released. Zagana, for instance, and but there were others that were not. Why do you think the considerations for deciding which political prisoners should be released or not, Dr. Cook?
Well, what we've seen with the ones that were released is that they are classified as prisoners of conscience, as the National Human Rights Commission said earlier this week, and so they're the ones which were seen as being a safer bet to release and maybe not cause so much dissent and opposition to the government at the moment.
Okay, well, Zagana, well, he slammed down President Thein Sein, saying that, you know, he's being stingy for not releasing more dissidents. So is this a fair statement?
I think certainly the European Union have said that it's more about the number, not exactly about who it is, but it's the number that are being released. And there are conflicting reports, as you mentioned, about the number of prisoners that have been released, between about 120 from the AAPP on the border up to about 300, which is the government figure. So when we see who and how many have been released, then we can have a clearer indication of what's been happening today.
I think at the same time, it's also important to realize that the Myanmar government generally moves slightly slowly on things, and change comes at a particular pace that's usually determined by its own assessment of the political climate. And so I think, in general, we have to perhaps modify our expectations about how fast these types of political reforms will occur. And at the same time, perhaps we'll see a little bit more movement on the release in near times in the future.
Okay, but then some are saying that, you know, with this release, there's always going to be a rearrest again. It happened a lot of times, you know, with Aung San Suu Kyi. So do you think it's going to happen in this current political climate of reforms and change?
Strategically, it doesn't seem to make sense that this would be the course of action that the government would pursue. They are, I think, are very concerned with dealing with the very matters that have been concerned over the last 20 years, which are bread and butter issues. I don't think they want to be tied down with the type of political issues that are surrounding political prisoners. And so to go back on some of these releases would only further cause problems for the real types of institutional changes that are in the process of occurring.
Okay. Well, Dr. Cook, what about the kind of message that this is sending to ASEAN that, you know, Myanmar is ready to take over the grouping's rotating chair?
Certainly. Well, the Indonesian foreign minister is going to Myanmar later this month, and then there's the ASEAN summit next month. And so I imagine we'll also see some significant developments around those times as well. So this is certainly part of their internal political development, but it's certainly assisting their international image as well with the regional grouping.
Okay, well, what about the outside world, you know, beyond just ASEAN as well? Do you think people can expect real change in Myanmar? I mean, you say change happens, but it's very slow.
It certainly is, and I think what we've been seeing is actually, if you, not just within the last 2 years, but we've actually been seeing change in the last 20-plus years. If you remember, in 1993, that's when the National Convention was first announced, and the national elections and so forth. The national referendum was also called for. These are steps that are slowly that have been occurring for some time. And yes, I think this is part of the longer process towards actually nation building, because you have to remember that at the end of the day, the country had been at civil war since 1948, and it's only in the mid-90s that some of these ceasefire agreements have been occurred, which has given them the space to allow these types of reforms to actually occur. So historically speaking, I think, yes, this is very interesting that's happening now, but only after these institutions have been placed that they've been allowed to do so.
Okay, so-called with this nation building and with these changes, do you think it's enough, the moves that they're taking right now, Dr. Cook, do you think it's enough for the West to lift sanctions on Myanmar?
At the moment, I wouldn't say that the West will be lifting sanctions. They will be calling for faster reforms to be carried out. But as we've said already, that the reforms are being driven from the inside the country, and so it sets its own agenda in that sense. And so there are small changes, and certainly Aung San Suu Kyi has been involved in dialogue with the president, and they'll be reforming some of the political party laws as well. So we might see some interesting developments on the opening up of political space for the NLD in the future.
Right. I would agree with that too, because it's clear that in the domestic scene, for those of us who have been there in recent weeks, in fact, that you do see changes. Now you have advocacy groups being able to meet very openly. You have media being able to report on these meetings, and so that these types of ideas are actually being spread out, and so now the general public can actually have access to the types of discussions about their own future. So I absolutely agree that the reform is going to have to happen from within and at their own timing.
All right. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your analysis and insights there. And I've been speaking with Dr. Maitri Angtwin from the National University of Singapore and Dr. Alistair Cook from the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Still ahead.